Good evening. We'll start tonight with England and Scotland. This is, believe it or not, where I stayed, in a castle. Okay, let me get the lights. So, let's see. That is Sherborne Castle. It had been an actual active castle at one point in time. My godparents owned a couple of places inside of it. If you look real closely, let's see if I can do this. Whoop, that's me sitting in the front of the castle. My godparents, like I said, they owned a couple of places in it. The whole area had been turned into condominiums, so they owned a few. It was really beautiful. It was all decorated with antiques and salmon carpet. It was quite a exotic place to stay. I was staying there with my cousins. We ended up traveling around a bit together, and then I went back and stayed there by myself for another few days. When I first met my cousins, we went to Oxford, England, for a little bit of a walk around, and this is my remembrance of there. There are flower hanging baskets. Hold on. I found a little light so that I could see. Let me turn it on. Aha. There are flower hanging baskets at the top poles all over Oxford. Each one's very colorful and full of flowers. Excuse me. They're so very pretty. I can't get over all the color from so many flowers at every corner, window, door, pole, lamp, and any and everywhere. I love it. There are little side streets with courtyards. It's super cute. There's red ivy on the walls that's very nice. So we left that area. I went for a run. I did a lot of running when I was in this phase of my life. So one morning I got up at the castle and went for a long run around the England area, around that area. We were in the Cotswolds. And went through running the cemeteries. They were all covered in moss, and everything was really beautiful. There were sheep all over the place when I was out for my run. Just kind of staring at me, wondering what I was doing running. This is an overview of Cotswold area. And then we headed up through the lake country and up towards Scotland. I was not really too ooh, that one's got a lot of mold on it. I was not all that interested in this lakes area. I had thought it was going to be pretty uninteresting, but it turned out to be really, really quite beautiful. This is what I wrote about the lakes, as they call them. The Lake District of the Lakes is fantastic. It is my favorite so far. It is nothing like I expected, which I thought was going to be like a flat, small kind of Kentucky hills with little ponds. Instead, it's huge hills, windy streets, rocky and uneven ground, covered with beautiful, very deep, dense green grass, monster-sized lakes. You know, it was right up near Scotland. With wet forest up the banks by the road. It was mountain-like, like really rounded, Blue Ridge, but the hills were close by and we were at the very bottom, so they looked huge. I didn't get any really good pictures of the area because I was not a really great photographer, although I also had a lot of prints, color prints that I was taking, so these are only the slides. But anyway, we headed over by ferry upside down to Dunoon, and they were having a Scottish festival going on when we were there. There's one of my little redhead cousins, not really, but sort of, yes, and doing their Scottish dancing. There was some bagpipes, which was really fun to hear in Scotland. There was a really stormy evening. It seemed very appropriate. This was more of the dancers. This is the one where they are these really quite large beasts of men throwing things. The shot put, it was like a very ancient kind of looking thing. And this is a guy holding a pole that he is getting ready to throw. It's a telephone pole size stick, and they throw it. And they do quite well with it, and they can kind of definitely throw it further than one would expect. We left at noon and headed over to this other area by Stirling. The castle was very near. This is near the place where we found to sleep, and where we found to sleep was somewhere that Mary, Queen of Scots, had gone to school. It had a lot of similar characteristics to the castle. We slept there that night, and the next morning I woke up, decided, well, let's see, here's my little room in the castle. Also kind of, it was a school that had then been turned into a place to sleep. And so the next morning I woke up, decided to go for a run. I left at 6:30 in the morning. No one was up, and the doors were locked. I decided to go ahead and let them shut. They were self-locking because I figured someone would be up when I got back around 7. I ran in the woodsy path by the castle, along a wall with sheep grazing, up the steps of a steep hill with wildflowers scattered, and back to the castle parking lot. I was ready to go in, and the door was locked. No sign of life. I sat on the wall. I tried to find a way to scale down into the patio, but with no luck. I sat there for 30 minutes and no life. I started to get cold because I just had on a pair of shorts and a t-shirt because I had been out for a run. So I went over to the Mars house, which was built in either the 13 or 1500s. It was run by the church where Mary went, and then it started to rain. I went back to the wall and stared at the windows, hoping I might be underneath Morris and Alice, my cousin's room, or our shared bathroom. 45 minutes after I started running, someone looked out of the window. They looked kind of like they were trying to figure out what was wrong. I wasn't sure who it was, but I was doing all kinds of charades down underneath the castle. I thought they got the message, so I went across to wait at the doors. No one came. I went back to the wall, and I could definitely tell this time it was Alice, and she didn't know about the other set of doors. So she ended up coming and let me in. It is one of her biggest memories of being in Europe, was looking down from underneath the castle window and seeing her cousin down there doing charades in the grass in a pair of shorts. We then went on to Stirling Castle proper itself. It's hard to see, especially because this is upside down, but those are marks where people had tried to batter and make their way into the castle. It was really pretty interesting to be there because everything kind of comes to life when you're out there. Let's see, there were one of the places I was going to read about. I thought that Mary, Queen of Scots, grew up at Stirling, and it seemed like such a really great place to be a child. There were so many secret hideouts and corners and things that you could get lost in and make believe and everything. A lot of Scotland was built with stones that were definitely darker than the ones in the English castles that we went to. This is a portrait carved out of wood. That would be amazing to have done. This was down in the basement area, not really deep basement, but not on the top, where these little holes where you could look out of and you could shoot anybody coming to try and attack you, but they couldn't shoot back in. And now they're covered in bars. That's looking out over the Stirling from the castle. My cousins were very in love. It was really fun to travel with them because of that. And then Stirling itself. One of the other memories I have was at the castle, Morris was interested in something that one of the tour guides had told us. And so we stopped afterwards, but we couldn't understand what she was saying. The Scottish accent is far thicker than the British one, at least was for us. So we stopped and asked this lady if she could tell us what this man's name was, how to spell it. And she said, just like it sounds. Well, that's the problem. This is in Edinburgh, which they had lots of wrought iron in Edinburgh. That's the main thing I remember about being there. One of these I was going to read something about being there and people getting shot and killed. Oh, it's the one coming up after Edinburgh. Throw in something besides castles and stone. Little birds on the wall. Okay, so this next one coming up is Holy Rotten House. Obviously, I have no idea how to really pronounce it. But this is one of the places where Mary stayed here a lot. We walked down the little stairs from the king's bedroom to the queen's and came out where Mary lived. It was in a room just twice the size of a bay window, was her private dining room, where Prince D came in and killed the secretary, Mr. Rizzo, Mary's lover. It's easy to imagine all this happening when you're there. One of the cool things about traveling to places is the things that you've learned come alive. They're real. Like when I was in Norway and we were on that boat that they had used to help people escape from the Nazi U-boats. We were coming up the fjords. It's also kind of hard to imagine, unless you're there, how big these things are, and honestly how many of them are there. This is Jedburgh Abbey. Still in Scotland. I have not made it to Ireland. I would like to go. I am Scotch-Irish, as they say. And someday I'll get over to the other part of my history. The part of my other part. So after Morris and I and Alice, we started heading back down Scotland and went to Sir Walter Scott's place. This is near Melrose. Tiny little house just in the curve of the road. Sir Walter Scott's place. Not bad for a poet. We left there and headed on over to York, which is a really cool, tiny little, well, not tiny, but the streets are really small, though buildings are built. When you wanted to expand, the only way you could expand was out into the street. so the windows, you can almost shake hands with your neighbor across the street. They're so close. I woke up in the morning wherever we were staying there, and I got to go out for a run on the wall that was built by the Romans. That was really cool. It was built around 30 or 75 AD, and I was running on it almost 2,000 years later. York Minster. They didn't waste any stone on anything. They used an awful lot. No idea where they quarried it all. But it's a pretty grand place. All their churches. Amazing stained glass. After that, Morris and Alice went on over to the mainland, and I joined them a little while later, but I went on a tour of Windsor Castle by myself on the long walk, which it is incredibly long. I was heading over to see a friend that I had met at another friend's wedding. She lived there and invited me to come stay with her. She lived at Headley on the Thames, and so I headed over to her place after here. She was drinking scotch straight up, non-stop, and smoking cigarettes, chain smoking. There wasn't 5 minutes in between each one. A lot of times she wasn't puffing on them, but they were always lit. She is a school headmaster, which I found kind of entertaining. Apparently, when she goes to school, she might not be quite as drunk. But then I found out later she hadn't been to sleep for 24 hours, so that was part of the reason that she seemed quite so wasted. She took me to this country club area where the people were all playing croquet in their white clothes, because it's the law that everybody has to have on all white. Then later her stepson took me to a pub. It was a free house, which I learned means that it's not owned by a brewery. He told me this joke about the Rolls Royce. When one goes by in England, they say there's a Yank and a Brit standing there, and a Rolls Royce goes by, and the Brit says, "There goes the Queen." And the Yank, who is an American, says, "One day I'm going to own one of those." We got to ride on a boat on the Thames and use the locks. I'd never heard of locks before, where you stop the water and rise the level and get off, and it's a way to jump up a hill. We went driving around. We went past George Harrison's house. She took me into this other house that was one of her friends. It was built in the 1500s, and all the timber had been sanded down to the hardwood, so that meant no bugs would eat it. It was a gorgeous home. Then afterwards we went back to her house, and this is a little bit I wrote from there. I was watching TV, and at 9 o'clock I fell asleep on her Turkish rug in front of a fire. I woke up and we talked until 7 o'clock in the morning. A lot about mothers and children, attitudes of life, and I have no idea what else. So fun things that you never know you're going to get into when you're out traveling. I left her place and went back to Sherborne Castle and got to go horseback riding when I was there. England has a rule that you have to have public bridle paths everywhere, so we were able to open any of the gates and go riding through all the fields and the countryside where we wanted to. Pretty fascinating. Okay, I'll be back with something else. Ciao.